So when I'm talking about specific channels, I'm not trying to flame war witch hunt them. I'm simply just getting out my frustration with a lot of the popular motions. There's a lot of AI nonsense online as well. And I think this is partly giving a rise to this misunderstandings of the occult, because there's so much knowledge and all of these things are just AI generated nonsense and bullcrap. And this is kind of why I feel like I have something to give, because I really speak from the heart and my intent and I really speak from the intellect, the intellectual side. I really analyze what I'm doing. So I like to analyze it. And as a scientist, I've learned how to look at things analytically. It really gave me a decent lens to look at life in a much more coherent and structural fashion that's unblinded by the world or the venom of the fabric of what the world is, essentially the propaganda of what the world is kind of trying to nourish us with. I believe that the occult is nonetheless an art. We're learning how to play maximally. We're learning how to enjoy ourselves. What I don't understand about a lot of these channels is they don't teach this. They don't teach enjoyment. They teach a specific fundamental that they see as true. And I think there are a lot of variables when it comes to practicing. It's not just about one way or another. Everybody's way is kind of different and completely traversable. And that's why I want to bring out this idea that it's not just about learning and understanding that you should be playing more. There's a process to that, you know. You can play better or you can play worse. I think the more loose you are, the loose you essentially are, the better you're going to be playing, the more cogent you're going to be looking at your practice, the more scientifically minded and unwired you're going to be with your practice. And I think that's it. We have to, when we're going into dance or trance, which is dancing is actually just a cult ritual in many ways. Like dancing is getting into trance. It's learning how to enjoy yourself, right? It's no less than any other ritual we're talking about or any other art. All of these things are just the same and on a different way. It's the same steak and a different sauce, essentially. So what I want to give forth is there is no such split between I'm practicing the occult and I'm doing art and I'm enjoying myself, and all these things are essentially coalescent to one thing. There is no separation. It's easy to become domestic with a practice, especially when in the occult literature, when you look at a book or a grimoire and you're looking at a specific way of doing something, you know, it becomes difficult and very, you know, austere when you try and find the meaning behind it all. And I think this is why so many people are like, we have such a flood of information right now of different areas. Everybody's saying this and everybody's saying that, and you know, there's no real way. Like, how deep do you go? I just think the answer to this all is to understand that what we're doing eventually is we want to become better people. That's it. We want to be, in the end, we want to be freer people. We want to get away from dogma. We want to get away from religious tyranny. This is why we're doing these practices, because we want to be freer. You know, we want to give ourselves the permission to be children again. We want to give ourselves the permission to play again, to be able to go from, like I always say, the concrete to the abstract. This is exactly what you're trying to do when you go into the occult. You're learning how to be going back into your roots, going back as your roots as you were in the child, the enigma of a child. You're going back to the childhood stage of becoming abstract again, of looking at the world in its fanciful meridian, in the bosom of fantasy, in phantasm. This is what I see when I look at the occult. You're tapping into a bigger metaverse that is essentially the embroidery of archetypes, of spirit, which is exactly spirit. Because when you were born, you would be part of something that was very primal. You were part of your mother, essentially, right? And you got separated, but life made you more separated. The trick now is to go back to the mother stage, to the stage where you were your mother, essentially. Because if you think about it, there was no split between you and your mum when you were born. You were part of your mum in a way, and the deviation happened when you were born and society started forming you. But spirituality and occult brings us back to the infancy. It brings us back to who we really are. We are never lost. You see, my point is, we are always the infants. Society taught you how to not be an infant. Society taught you how to be its slave. And you can see where it's going to lead you. You can look around you and realize what happens with the slave master analogy. That people are essentially, they're so ostracized and gaslighted and fermented to the likes of society. And they're spearheaded by a bigger purpose that serves not themselves, not their own rules, not their own liking, not their own intellect, but society's intellect, society's rule, society's making, right? My role is to teach you guys to de-occultize the occult, essentially. To learn to unbrothel the occult, because it's a brothel of people who believe, that's one way, my way or the highway, and that's the way to do the ritual. There's no other way. And what I'm saying is that I don't believe in this. I don't see a reason to really believe in this wholeheartedly. I don't see why this is true. What I do see is dogma. What I do see is imposition on false dogma that get people into it. Not that dogma can be true, but it's a false directive to essentially get people into their own covens. And this is why the occult, like many things, like hypnotism, has been so successful in ages, because it teaches people a dependency. All these books, grimoires, spell books, are dependence. They teach you dependency, and it's not the books per se, but it's a bigger purpose. The purpose is propaganda, it's journalism, it's false journalism, it's essentially journalism. Like the occult world is essentially full of journalist propaganda. The grimoires that you see are journalists. They're journalistic, articles, essentially. They are just in text form, but they're journalists. These people knew how to be cunning. They knew how to be wicked enough to get people interested in their works. They sold their works for a couple of dimes and dollars, and they got pretty wealthy from this, and that's why they did it, because they knew they could create an intent, that they had secret knowledge. My point is, they don't. They don't have, in fact, they are actually so corrupted and wicked that they don't really have secret knowledge. You, who's wiser, understand the principle now. You understand that the real occult is intention. The real occult is your will. It's the will that Schopenhauer talked about and spoke about, that permeates pretty much everything in the universe. It's your will. It's that will, that force that you can tap into. And once you can understand it, this is when the magic starts to happen. That's when the puppet starts dancing. And that's where the puppeteer essentially starts to vacate. Is when the puppets realize who they are. They're not anymore part of the strings. They can cut themselves free from it. They can become something else. The Pinocchian archetype, right? Understanding that you are a puppet and getting away from it to become a real boy. It's a very, very deep and intriguing analogy, because I think it gives rise to, to Prometheus rising, essentially, to become, and I think one of the main societal traps is essentially to become the Dionysian elite, somebody who keeps rolling a stone up the hill, and the stone keeps falling back. That is not wisdom. That is defeat or foolishness. That's foolery, essentially. That's a fool's errand. That's kind of pawn sacrificing, as I call it. It's like you keep sacrificing pawns to try and get. It's stupid, because in the end you lose your main hedge of defense. The trick here is to understand that Dionysus is an idiot. The trick here is to understand that the real genius is Prometheus. To look at the rock and to say, who cares? I'm not going to keep rolling the rock up because somebody tells me to do that. I'm going to leave the rock. I'm going to let it tumble down. I'm going to find a way, or either over the rock, or I'm going to ascend the rock. I'm going to ascend the rock. I'm going to get away from the rock and away, or I'm going to bloody split the rock. But Prometheus is the hero. Dionysus is the idiot. So, or is it Diogenes? The dude who rolls up the rock, or the god who rolls up the rock and it keeps falling down, he would just keep going on endlessly. That's kind of the Einstein's metaphor or axiom for idiocy, as doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results, right? Now, I was kind of hedging away. I was kind of adjunct, flipping the burger on either side. I was getting away from the point. My point was that I can't say it enough. I really can't say it enough. Before this channel is going to go further, I want people to comment and to really get this, that without really looking at themselves, they're not going to get anywhere. If you really can't look at yourself, you really can understand that all these texts everybody is giving you, essentially handing out like chocolates in a chocolate shop, you're never going to become wise. You're never really going to ascend. You're always going to be in Darkland. You're always going to be in Birdland. It's essentially, you're never going to be able to get out in the world where you realize that's a scarecrow, and it's been a scarecrow all around, and you can transcend from that narrative. You will never get there, because in the land of the pig, the butcher is king. Do you know that it's a song from Meatloaf? In the land of the pig, the butcher is king. I love that as an analogy. In the land of the pig, the butcher is king. If you're a pig, if you really want to be a pig, The butcher is always going to slay you. The key is to see through the veil, right? So you don't have to keep crying. And the way that you do it is to understand, and that is where knowledge comes in, Gnosis, where you understand that you have the power. You have the power. You can use anything as a symbol. Whatever archetype you want to be using, you can use as a symbol. You can transmute all these symbols into one thing. It's not about a specific grimoire. It's not about a specific way of doing something, a way that other people are saying you should be doing that. It's about doing something that you feel is treacherous to you, to your soul, to your mind, to your narrative, to your spirit. This is where the cookie crumbles, essentially what they say, that when the cookie crumbles, this is when the cookie crumbles, when you start to notice that it's your narrative. And you start to embroil this narrative in your life. You work with it. And that's why in Chaos Magic, they talk about giving, I can't remember the specific, I'm not very versed in it because I'm a scientist, but they talk about subdivision, essentially. They talk about assigning tasks to specific facets of your mind. Mentally, it's like a mental process where your mind starts to become a mechanical orgasm, and it starts working on these facets. And what happens eventually is that whilst you're asleep, your mentalism is essentially working on specific fabrics of your task, and they're chopping it up. And what's happening then is that in the end, the science of it is that everything would essentially add up again to become a transformative unit. Now, in practice, this doesn't really work like this. This is more intention setting. Now, it doesn't mean that you're abstained from action. Alas, actually what's happening is that you become action. Because when you realize you can direct your mind into action, this is when you become more stronger. In the Ars Notoria, for instance, it talks about memorizing symbols and you will have a mastermind. It's the intention behind this that's actually giving people the intellect. It's the intention of this that gives people the intellect to tap into. It's not that they really become smarter, but they tap into a higher force of intelligence by realizing they have it already in them. So it's also mnemonical. So it's placebolic, that's partly so, but it's also accessing a higher state of mind that you know is already there. So it's partly placebo and partly actual, I would say. So this is just what I wanted to bring forth. So thank you very much for listening. I'm going to be talking about